Hello and welcome, everyone. Oh, there we go. The slides are coming up. Welcome to this East West Railway Company online session with your neighboring parishes and councillors along the Bicester area. My name is Jordi Vescoche, and I'm one of the engagement managers here. And we're very pleased that you can join us to this second meeting, following on from the one we held back in April on the first week of consultation. As advised on the invitation, the session today is an opportunity for you to raise any outstanding questions that you or your residents might have on our proposals now that you've had a chance to engage with the documents and sort of talk to your residents, and I'm guessing that they will have been in touch with you. And basically we want to ensure that we've tackled all your key questions before you submit your response to the consultation, which will be closing on the 9th of June. Ahead of today's session, we ask you to let us know if there were any questions or issues you wanted us to address during the meeting. Thank you to those of you who've written to us. We've tried to reflect those as much as possible in the slides that you're going to see in a second, but in any case, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, and obviously for those who haven't, don't worry, as I said, we'll have 50 minutes of Q&A, so plenty of time to raise your questions. We are holding similar sessions with all the parishes and councillors within the consultation zone between Oxford and Cambridge throughout this week. We're just kickstarting with this one. So, and in terms of structure, we will give you kind of like a brief presentation that will run for around 30 minutes. Then we'll move on to the aforementioned kind of like extensive Q&A before we wrap up with some next steps. And the session overall should last around an hour and a half. Said that, I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the team joining me today. We have our strategy and sponsorship director, Will Gallagher. We also have Lyndon Adolphus, who is our program manager for the Marston Bay line, but who also looks after London Road level crossing. And we're also joined by Hannah McCarthy and James McCollum from ACOM and Barley, who are supporting us holding this session by note-taking and monitoring the chat bar. Before we start with the presentation, as you can see on the slide, I'm going to quickly run you through a brief housekeeping and Zoom etiquette. I mean, by now, we're probably all quite familiar with Zoom, but just as a reminder, you'll find in the bar below different features, including the button to mute yourself, as well as share your camera, open the chat window, or check the list of participants. We'd also be grateful if you could rename yourself to display your full name if your Zoom account doesn't show your actual name already. We'll ask you to stay muted at all times unless you're given the floor during the Q&A to avoid sort of echoes and unpleasant noises. And if you experience any technical issues during the meeting, please email contact@eastwestrail, and we'll try to kind of get you back in as soon as possible. In terms of the Q&A, we'll aim to address your questions. If we're not able to address some, or we run out of time, we would take those away and address them via email afterwards. And during the Q&A, if you want to raise a question, please post them in the chat. You can send questions through at any time during the presentation, although we hope the slides already address some of your inquiries. And to kind of raise questions during the Q&A, please indicate so by pressing the raise your hand button, which you can find in the bottom right of the participants list, although sometimes it's sort of displayed already in the bar, depending on which Zoom version do you have. And with that, we've covered all the housekeeping, so I'm going to hand it over to Will.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure,
yeah. Councillor Les Sibley speaking. What it is, there's a number of people have been trying to get in on this meeting this evening. Unfortunately, are unable to, and just wondering whether apparently there's a meeting tomorrow morning as well. Just wondering whether you could send out a link again to interested members so they can join tomorrow morning.
Yes, I'm sure we can arrange that Hannah, we could make a note of it. Tomorrow morning is like the session with like the representatives of Oxford, but obviously like an outskirt of Cherwell, I suppose. But like, yeah, for sure, like I'm sure that they can attend the, if you wouldn't mind letting us know, actually Hannah, who her name is either way our company, which people would be interested in attending, I'm sure we can make sure that they receive like links for the session tomorrow morning. Also to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and will be made available over the next few days for those of you kind of like that want to rewatch it, or if you want to share with your some of your residents and representatives. And on that note, I think we can now start with the presentation. So over to you, Will.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jordi. So just in terms of who we've invited today, we have invited a series of parish councils. You can see there the sort of key parish councils in the Bicester area. So just so everybody's aware of who we have been in touch with in terms of who's been invited today. If we flick on to the next one, we've also invited the sort of wards from the sort of key from the district council. So that's you can see again that area sort of highlighted. And if we move on to the next one, also wards from Oxfordshire County Council as well. So again, you can see those wards marked there on the map. So just so you're aware of who we've invited today. In terms of what we're going to cover, we'll do a quick recap in terms of what we're actually consulting on, and the sort of key themes and questions that have come up during the consultation so far, and offer you some sort of answers to those questions at a general level. We'll reflect on sort of how best to get local communities involved, because we really do want to get as stronger response to this consultation as we can. And then finally, open up for Q&A so that we've got plenty of time to answer your questions as we go. So in terms of a recap of what we're consulting on, if we move on to the next slide, we're obviously in the middle of the non-statutory consultation between the 31st of March and the 9th of June. Moving on to the next slide, you'll be aware, I think we've shared this slide with you before, it's a 10-week consultation looking at the customer experience and railway operations, as well as a series of infrastructure interventions all the way from Oxford through to Cambridge, the necessary interventions for delivering the scheme. So if we flick on to the next slide, just sort of worth having a look there at the sort of consultation zone, and obviously the area that you'll be most interested in, I imagine, is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, sort of obviously the Bicester area where we showed you the overlapping wards for the representatives that we've invited along today. But what is in the shaded area is our consultation zone. So that's specifically who will have received our literature and those sorts of things through the post. If we move on to the next slide, and just to very briefly touch on the customer experience and railway operations, the way we see this is, not just about being at the station or on board in isolation, but really thinking about the whole end-to-end journey that our customers want, and making sure we're getting, we're getting people's feedback on how we can make that the best possible experience for people and all those kind of key touch points. And as we move on to the next slide, you will see that where we're sort of asking for people's input, we really do want this, and we've talked about 5 key areas, because our research has sort of highlighted those as the kind of most important areas. But as I shared with you on the previous slide, we are interested in how people sort of see the whole journey. And one of the reasons for having this conversation is we know, that there is going to be sort of disruption and impact that comes from developing this railway. We recognise that. But there are some significant benefits of East West Rail, and having a really good quality customer service, we think, is an important one, and we want to make sure that people are having their say to help us shape that as much as possible. So if we move on, you can see here the full geography of the consultation, and we're today going to talk about the blue box on the left-hand corner, and sort of specifically the Bicester area within that. So if we move on to the next slide. Yeah, let's just pick up what's going on in the Oxford to Bicester area in section A. So we are going to need to, as we've said, I think before, increase the capacity in this area in terms of making sure the stations at Oxford and between Oxford and Vista, so Oxford Parkway as well, have the capacity that they need, as well as the approach into Oxford Station, or how we make the Oxford Station work, and we're working pretty is obviously critically important. So if we move on to the next slide. You can see on the map there that we will be thinking about improvements at Oxford Station, improvements potentially between Oxford Station and Oxford North Junction, potential improvements at Oxford Parkway as well, then on to Bicester, and their improvements at Bicester Village Station if that's necessary. Really just to make sure that we've got the capacity that we need for the increased usage that we're likely to get by introducing East West Rail, and also, and this will obviously be a particular area of interest for people, the crossing at London Road, and making sure that we sort of take forward proposals for that in a way that obviously works for a faster, more reliable, more frequent train service that reduces traffic disruption and improves safety. And it is, I think we are clear that this is looking at the London Road level crossing issue is challenging. It absolutely is, and there aren't easy answers, and that is why we do want sort of genuine levels of engagement to to unpick this and work out what the right thing to do is. And that's why if we move on to the next slide, we've got a little bit of detail here on a Bicester Village Station itself in terms of expanding parking facilities, thinking about the access to the station, local highway network, things we can do around the customer experience as well. So we do want to sort of hear people's views on that, but then critically, I think on the slide that comes next, sort of getting more into the detail of the London Road level crossing and how that works, because if we just leave the level crossing as it is, we could be looking at a crossing that's down for sort of 50 minutes in the hour, and that isn't sustainable for anyone, and that is why we're looking at a number of options there. So if we just flick on to the next slide, we can have a look at what those options are. So the first is an accessible bridge at the crossing for non-motorized users, so for bikes and pedestrians, and the second is to look at an underpass in that location. The third is to look at a road bridge in that location. The fourth and fifth, again, look at the underpass and road bridge options, but sort of alongside where they the current alignment. And then 6 looks at alternative road crossing locations as well. So, a full range of options there, but recognizing that all of them are challenging in different ways. And we are keen to hear people's views on those. I think if we flick on to the next slide, that gets us to the end of the sort of the content that is in the consultation document. What we just wanted to do is sort of summarize for you the kind of key themes and issues that have been emerging for us during the consultation so far, and really then provide some answers to those, just as a precursor as to getting into your specific questions through the Q&A. So why don't we hand over now to Lyndon, who will sort of pick up the questions in relation in this section on London Road level crossing.
Hi everyone. So just addressing the three questions on this slide. The first one being the number of trains that would be traversing the area. So what we have currently, after configuration state 1 is operational, we'll have 2 trains in each direction, and which will result in the crossing being down for about 20 minutes in the hour. But when configuration state, combination state 2 and 3 comes into being, we will the number of trains will increase to 4 trains per hour in either direction, and the crossing will be down for approximately 50 minutes in the hour. As Will said, it makes it impractical to cross the London Road crossing itself. So that's why we have to seriously look at an alternative to that crossing, to mitigate closure of that crossing, because it's unrealistic to keep it open. The next question is, would closing London Road to vehicles and forcing all traffic around cut the town into half and make it more difficult to access the town centre? If certainly, closing the crossing will result in some traffic disruption. So that is why we are looking for the most practical, most convenient, and the least disruptive solution. And as you know, you've seen in the consultation document, we have 6 different options. For example, if we were just to implement the footbridge in and of itself, that would result in pushing traffic elsewhere onto the existing roads. So it's more than likely that option 1 will accompany another option. So in order to keep the severance to a minimum and the disruption to the town centre to a minimum. We also, I mean, now that I mentioned option 1, during our consultation, there was a lot of resistance or suggestions about perhaps not building a footbridge, with a ramped footbridge, primarily because of its visual impact. And we've taken that on board. One of the things that we are also going to be examining as part of this, part of our optioneering assessment, is a pedestrian underpass, either online or offline. What I mean by that is an online would be along the route of London Road itself, or offline would be just slightly to the left of London Road. But we can go into the details later on. Can more concepts, the third question here, can more concepts be added for the London Road level crossing, such as pedestrian underpass? I've just answered that. Yes, it's possible. We are looking at that. So I also want to just finish off by saying all the concepts that we've presented in our technical documentation have been gathered from previous historical reports and studies. We as a company have not done any analysis. We've not gone out there and done any surveys. We have not done any feasibility work as yet. We've simply gathered data, synthesized the data, and we are now currently kicking off feasibility studies. So we're examining each option in greater detail. We're considering new options that have been presented to us over the non-stat consultation period. And again, if anything new comes up here, if somebody here has some ideas, we'll also throw it in the mix. That's it from me. Will, do you want to continue?
So yes, I'm just struggling to take myself off mute.
Right.
Really just sort of picking up, what are the plans for freight? So I think the first thing to say here is, there's a sort of set of questions in terms of how much freight traffic will there be? Will freight trains be running 24 hours a day? And is this mainly a passenger or a freight railway? So what we're currently asked to do by the Secretary of State for Transport is to protect the existing freight paths. So where there is existing freight usage, that will remain. And so we won't, there wouldn't be a, that wouldn't, that sort of built in, as it were. There may be some potential to see that sort of freight traffic increase, but I think there are just a few things to say on that. It's mainly to do with actually the capacity to get to and from East-West Rail in the first place. So the constraints tend to be on the existing rail network. And I don't think all the existing freight paths that exist at Bicester, are being used, and therefore, it's almost the case that you could see, even from where we are today, without East-West Rail, you might see further usage. So, but my point is that the constraints are there, which are not directly linked to East-West Rail, and that is probably the most likely limiting factor. In terms of freight trains running 24 hours a day, we've set out in the consultation document our hours of operation, which currently don't envisage freight running overnight. So, at the moment, that's sort of not in our plans. And is it mainly a passenger or a freight railway? Well, given that we're going to be looking at, sort of 4 trains an hour in this area on the passenger basis, the level of freight traffic is not likely to be concomitant with that. In fact, significantly less. So it will predominantly be a passenger railway, but that does not preclude freight operating on the railway. But it is predominantly a passenger railway. We're still doing work on what we think the likely demand for freight is, and discussing with the department what their long-term, with the Department for Transport, what their long-term freight strategy is. But right now, ours is a predominantly passenger railway, and in terms of freight traffic, its level is mainly to do with constraints that already exist, on the existing rail network. So hopefully that's helpful. If we move on to the next slide. Some people are asking us about our approach to consultation more generally. And if we sort of flick onto the next slide, in terms of whether we'll be extending the consultation to allow for face-to-face events. So we've been doing a huge number of these virtual events, which is absolutely, in keeping with the guidance that many projects have been following during the consultation. During the lockdown, so virtual consultations have become the norm. Our current consultation ends before it would be possible to do face-to-face events, and as yet, it's not yet confirmed that there would be the opportunity to do face-to-face events, even if we did extend. So I think the key thing here is that we have been doing lots of virtual events. They have been sort of working successfully. And for those people who do have sort of specific questions that they want answering, we have a couple of options. So people can email us or they can phone us, or we have live chat events where people can speak directly to our experts, just as they could in a face-to-face consultation. So we do think we have offered a comprehensive consultation there. In terms of how will we analyze the feedback and rank the concepts, so what we'll do is all the analysis that people give us will all be read. All of it will be individually read and taken into account. We then group all the responses, all the feedback that we've got sort of thematically, so we can look at, in relation to each individual theme, the feedback that we've been getting, so we can properly look at it in the round. And that will help us when we come to apply our assessment criteria for what our preferred options are. And we've already set out, I think, our sort of list of 15 assessment criteria that we use, and we'll take the insight from the consultation responses as we apply those assessment criteria. And then in terms of, when will we know which concept has been selected? We're obviously going to continue to do sort of work on developing the options, taking into account your feedback. By the time we get to the statutory consultation, so this is a non-statutory consultation, before we submit our DCO, we will do another formal round of consultation, which is our statutory consultation. Before we get to them, we will set out in that statutory consultation, most likely our preferred option, as well as the options that we haven't taken forward. But it won't be until we submit our DCO when we actually go, this is precisely what we are submitting, and this is precisely the concept that we've gone for. But our aim is, by the time we get to the statutory consultation, for people to be able to see the direction that we're heading in and what our preferred concept is at that point. So hopefully that covers those sort of questions. If we move on to the next slide. Those were the sort of some of the themes, and we're going to come to Q&A no doubt in the next few minutes. But we just wanted, again, just to make sure that people were aware of the ways for people to get involved. So we do have virtual consultation rooms that are open all the way through to the 9th of June, where there's a huge amount of information and documents and maps and for people to get access to. We also have the live chat events that I've been talking about, and we've still got a number of those that are scheduled for people to attend. As I've said, we've got our dedicated phone line, so for those who aren't able to use the online forums and either don't have or don't find it hard to use internet services, then the phone line and the phone number is there for people to use. And we have seen people using that phone line, so we're really pleased that that's working. And then online, there is that feedback form, but also if people do want that feedback form in other ways, we can send it to them. So if we head on to the next slide, I think we actually provide some details of when those live chat events are. So we've still got a series of live chat events both later this week and next week for people to engage in, and you can see there the kind of live chat forum. And then in terms of responding to the consultation, as I've said before, we do want people to respond. There is the online form. There's also the email direct, so consultation@eastwestrail.co.uk, or there's free post as well, so people can send their forms back in. So if people do want a paper copy of the form, or if they drop us an email or give us a call, we can get one in the post to them so that they can use that free post address. But as I say, there is either email or online as well. So I think that probably brings us to the conclusion of the sort of what we wanted to cover today in terms of a quick summary of the consultation again for you, the key themes that have been sort of coming to light as we've been going through this consultation, and also sort of ways for your communities to get involved. We've now got plenty of time, just under an hour, for Q&A, so happy to take your questions.
Does anyone have a pressing question, or have we done a tremendous job at covering them all in the slide deck? There we go. We have the first one. Les, please go for
it. Yes, thank you. Just a couple of quick questions, really. You mentioned about the about 4 trains, 8 trains, 4 trains in either direction per hour, which is 8 trains. If you had it over a 24-hour period, that could result in almost nearly 200 trains going through a 24-hour period at Vista. Something that's just occurred to me straight away: why have a 15-minute service when perhaps you could just have either a half an hour or even an hourly service, which I'm sure would people could appreciate as well. And in my way of thinking, surely that would reduce the amount of time that you would need the barriers to be down. But maybe I'm wrong, and you can tell me something slightly different than that. But it's just a quick question to look at that. The other consideration about whatever option you come up with is thinking, certainly from the south side, and I think you opened up the presentation earlier on to say that that you're using data previously used. I'm just wondering whether you've taken on board the data and the fact that the development of Vista is growing so fast from the south side, and whether you've taken note of the Wexford Green development, which is about 2,000 dwellings. You've got the Craven Hill, another 2,000 plus dwellings going on there, which is not, none of these been completed yet. The Langford Village itself, and I understand there's still a few more dwellings to be completed on Langford Village. You then got Ambrosden, Arncott, and industrial development on the A41 coming from on the Aylesbury Road. So my point here is that they all want to come into, they want to take the shortest route and get into the town centre, because at the end of the day, they're local residents in the main. So, and I'm just wondering if something, whatever the solution is going to push a lot of traffic movements in onto an area which is already congested. It will be now. We're sort of coming back out of lockdown on what I call the 1 square mile and the Vista hamburger junction, which is going to cause problems, and on the other side, which would be Bondi Drive as well. So there's a lot of issues that need to be taken into consideration. I just wondered whether you've given thought for that. And of course, there are plans in the very near future also to site a GP multi-surgery on sort of Craven Hill. And so that means people, again, wanting to come through the shortest route to get there, certainly from the east side. And that might cause a few problems, because I think a lot of people, just the residents, dread the thought of going through what we call the Rodney House or Boundary Way sort of roundabout as well. So there's a lot of issues here, and that's without having an option about getting across or over the London Road level crossing. And I just wanted to express those, and whether you've actually taken that on board as well. So thank you.
Will, would you like to get the first question?
Yeah, so in terms of the sort of usage for the sort of number of trains per hour, so they're in part based upon our demand modelling to understand what we think the demand for the service is likely to be. We also know that for people who do want to use the service to be able to sort of commute to work and those sorts of things, that having a quarter an hourly service in some instances is quite important, because it's what we call a sort of turn up and go service. So people aren't using, sort of don't rely on a timetable in necessarily the same way. But the other thing to say is that that is certainly true between Oxford through to Bicester to Bletchley. But at Bletchley, then 2 of the trains head towards Milton Keynes and 2 of the trains head towards Cambridge. So when you actually look at the Cambridge service is half hourly and the Milton Keynes service is half hourly. But that does mean at the Bicester level, it is every 15 minutes basically. But that is based upon our demand modelling. Now we keep that demand modelling under review, so as we know, people's patterns of work and those sorts of things are changing. So we will continue to look at it in that light. But that's where the volume has come from. What I'll do, Lyndon, is I'll probably leave you to answer the second question in terms of the sort of growth of Vista.
Sure, that's not a problem. That's a very good question that was put forward. As you're probably aware, Network Rail and OCC have done quite a lot of studies on the closure of the level crossing, and they've been looking for solutions going back as far as 2010. And as I said, I just summarize, what we've done is we've collated all of the data and the outputs from those studies, and we've crystallized them in the report that you see. We haven't done any work as yet, so I'm just repeating what I said. But we will take cognizance of demand that's arising from new development, because we will be doing a similar exercise with all of the level crossings, because we intend to do quite a bit of traffic modeling, traffic survey, demand forecasting, and to understand people and footfall within the station, movements, and so on and so forth. So certainly that's going to be part of what we do. And secondly, OCC have also recently carried out feasibility studies on options to close the crossing, and they've recently published their report only a few days ago, which is now, I believe it's officially out in the public domain. One of the proposals that they put forward was basically was to shut the crossing and convert a large section of the road and the highway network around the Bicester level crossing into a pedestrianized route and a cycle only route. So now that is an option which is also on the table for us. We will also look at that closely with Oxfordshire County Council. So to answer your question, we will be considering, although the information that we have, some of the data, the traffic modeling and the pedestrian modeling and so forth is old and historical. We have some fresh data from OCC, which was handed over to us over the last few days. And we have a report from them as well. And then we will be kicking off our studies over the next few months, leading up to Stat Consultation, where we hope we will land on a preferred front runner option. And I think Stat Consultation is starting sometime in March, April, May, June next year.
Just wanted to just finish with this quick one about the actual construction of whatever the proposal is. And I think you mentioned it earlier on, it's going to have a big impact on whatever the option is, and it's going to cause a lot of disruption, and that needs careful consideration. And we have no idea at this moment in time about whether, for instance, whatever the option is, it's going to result in a closure of that road, the London Road crossing, possibly for quite a considerable time, maybe even 2 years at a stretch. So that's what people would like to have a look at and see how that could be, how the construction of whatever the option is, its impact on the actual London Road level crossing itself. Thank you.
The option that would cause considerable disruption to us would be option two and three, which is I think it's the online underpass and overbridge. Online being on London Road itself. So for example, I'm just going to simplify this, not because you don't understand the technical detail, but just for the benefit of everyone else. And an online underpass would require significant, if you like, tunneling work under the existing railway, and also diversion of significant utilities, and also pumping station because of the water table. So because we will be going to a low point, and in order to do all of that work, we would certainly need to cut London Road off for it, as you say, perhaps even 2 years, as long as 2 years. Now that's going to be, like you mentioned, significantly disruptive to the community at large. So it's one of the least preferred options, to be honest with you. If we assess the cost of an online underbridge, it's extremely expensive. Disruption is huge. Utility diversion is going to cost a lot of money. So I think, as we go through our first sifting of the options, we currently have 10 options on the table. So what you see is 6 here, and we have the additional that was put forward over the last few months, over the last few weeks rather, during the non-stat consultation. So we'll be assessing all of those options. And so I can tell you, with an underpass, on the face of it, anecdotally, it's a very expensive option, and it's very unlikely for us to take that forward based on value for money. So yes, I fully appreciate that disruption. Any work on London Road will be extremely disruptive. I take that on board completely.
So John has his hand up. If you want to flag your question.
You've probably seen me before, and you mentioned one of the other options and 6 that you've got already.
Yes, John.
Obviously, you know the one that I'm suggesting. Option
Yes,
1 and 2. Option 1 and 2, the tunnel and the bridge in line with the London Road, you might just as well not have put them in, because they are completely impractical and impossible to do. The one that's nearest is perhaps option 5, which is the one I suggested. And if you have any discussion on that and you want to discuss it with me, please send me a date and a time, and I'll meet you at the crossing, and we can go and have a look at the site, and I'll work it through with you on site. So, you can discuss how it would work as being the only option that does in fact work. None of the other ones are practical at all. And just making it pedestrian and cycling doesn't answer the problem. But I wasn't really going to go on about London Road crossing again, but I just felt I had to. Obviously, the biggest question is whether it's going to be electric or diesel. And I believe that this is now being asked in Parliament as to why it's not electric, because it so obviously should be. We've got a climate change emergency. We're supposed to be going for carbon zero, and there's not supposed to be any more diesel trains after 2040. So somehow or other, this plan of not being electric just doesn't make any sense at all. So I hope that the decision from the Parliament will force you to use electric, because it should be. Now, the other point that sort of linked with some of the things you were mentioning, you mentioned Oxford Station. And of course, I guess you're working with the Oxford City people and Oxfordshire County Council to try and work out what on earth they're going to do with what is really a disgusting station for a big city like Oxford. And of course, we've also got the other aspect of 4-tracking from Didcot to Oxford, because that needs to be 4-tracked up to there, let alone going beyond and on up to the northwest. But the track coming up to Bicester, the next one up you mentioned was, of course, what we know as Bicester Town Station, but unfortunately got changed to Bicester Village. But Bicester Village Station, as you say, needs to be upgraded. And of course, one of the things that I would ask for, two things really. One is that I cannot understand how anybody built a car park in this day and age, which doesn't have any electric vehicle charging points in it. And one of the things that you might consider, if I may suggest, is that those people who go on a train, say to London or Cambridge or wherever they're going, are going for a substantial part of the day. So you don't need to fit in type 2, 7.6 kilowatt chargers or even rapid chargers. You only need a whole bank, maybe one for every car parking space, of a waterproof 13 amp socket, because every electric vehicle can charge off those. And as the people are going to be away for basically a day, that will almost fill up most electric vehicles just off a 13 amp. So you can cut the power required down as well. The other part of the existing station car park that really annoys me is you put the motorcycle parking down near London Road. It's just round the corner. If you go up Station Road, just turn left. That's the motorcycle parking. That is in the wrong place for two reasons. No motorcyclist is going to leave his bike there when you've got to walk all the way across the car park. Whereas in the old days, you used to be able to park on the pavement, up by the railings, up by alongside the cycle parks, on a motorcycle, and chain your bike to the railings so that it becomes secure. There's nowhere to secure it where it is at the moment. And not only that, you need to remember the way of stealing a motorbike is to turn up with a van, chuck it in the back of the van and drive off. It takes seconds if it's not anchored down to something. And that far away from the station means that it's not even visible, so it can't be secure. So please put some motorcycle parking back on the pavement, which is where it was until you put a notice up that says, please do not park motorcycles here or you will be prosecuted. That was such an evil thing to do. That is the most obvious place to put the motorbikes. As to freight, definitely needs to have freight. In fact, one of the earlier consultations you had several months ago now, there was a lady who did a really wonderful presentation on how this line is going to be so good for getting freight off the roads and onto the railway. And so I'm really supporting her in saying this definitely needs to have freight, which of course means the London Road crossing definitely has to be closed. And I find it really interesting that you also mentioned that OCC have been looking at this since 2010. That idea I put to you for an offset bridge that goes over the car park, that came out to me and it was shown to me by a Bicester Advertiser reporter in 2014. Now you've got a railway that works absolutely fine. And I think it's magnificent that you should even contemplate taking up the problem of that crossing, because it's really a highways problem. So your railway works fine. I reckon it's OCC's problem, but that's a different argument. So I'm with you on trying to do something, but I think that's probably covered everything. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So should I kick off? So, in terms of electric, we don't need forcing to make it electric. We can see the case for electrification of this railway line. Ultimately, that is a decision for government. And so what we are doing is looking at a set of options for how you get to a net zero carbon railway, because full overhead line electrification is definitely one option. But with emerging technology, particularly around battery, it may be possible to get a combination of battery and overhead line electrification, because there are some places, we definitely hear when we do this presentation in other parts of the route, that people are concerned about the visual impact of gantries and those sorts of things. So if it is possible to find a balance between battery and electric, for example, then that also reduces the cost to the taxpayer. So there are options that we are looking at, but our ambition is to be a net zero carbon railway. We're putting those options to government, and we hope they will make a decision on that, so we can sort of proceed down whichever route it is they want to go. But we don't really want to build a diesel railway, as you say, from 2040 onwards. There can't be diesel only trains on the railway. So I think that's just the first thing to say. Don't think we're championing a diesel railway. We're not. In relation to Oxford Station, yes, we are working very closely, with the local authorities, with Network Rail as part of the Oxfordshire Connect group. As part of that, one of the things that the group are looking at is the tracking to Didcot and how that would work. And again, a lot of these things will turn on government's willingness to invest as we grow. So that's that will, as we develop the schemes and people sort of get to prioritise what's coming. Your point about sort of charging, it's one of the things that's quite important for us, is that obviously the trajectory in terms of electric vehicles and those sorts of things has changed a lot over time, even over recent years. So probably when you were thinking about Vista Village Station, maybe back in 2010, 2012, it perhaps wasn't as obvious as it is today. But one of the things we're doing a lot of is looking at what do we think the sort of future transport needs are going to be around autonomous vehicles and all those sorts of things. So we take that into account in terms of the way we design the stations. But you're absolutely right that we can, there is clear case for electric vehicle charging points and a mixture of fast charge and also all day charging. So we can absolutely, we can see how there's a case for that. And then turning to your point on sort of on freight and how we, and trying to sort of grapple with the level crossing, ultimately, we are trying to work as much as we can with Oxfordshire County Council and with others to, to get to a solution that works for everyone, because we can't deliver a railway service, at the frequency or the reliability that we want without dealing with the level crossing. But likewise, you can't get London Road working in the way that people need it to work without resolving these issues. So, as I say, there aren't easy answers here, and we're very grateful for you for the sort of the points that you're making, and I know Lyndon will pick up with you offline in terms of how we sort of take some of that forward. But yeah, definitely, we are working as best we can to try to find a solution that works for everyone.
Also, on that point, I suppose, good to remind that, this is also one of the reasons why, we're doing the consultation and why this type of feedback is so valuable. And if we can have that in sort of formal submission, that's absolutely brilliant for us. So we can take it into consideration. Besides kind of Lyndon, I've seen him scribbling, and I'm sure he might be in touch with you at some point in the future. But having that in formal submission, that would be extremely valuable. So thanks for that. Next one, Eleanor has her hand up.
Hi there. So I want to talk about a temporary solution whilst once it's been decided, whichever method is agreed on, whether it's online or offline. Obviously, in the time that it takes to finish that and so on, the line will not be available to cross for anyone from the south or the north, whichever way direction they're going. Has a temporary solution been considered? For example, the existing Bicester Village Station bridge and lift, would that be open to pedestrians and cyclists to use who don't necessarily want to enter the station itself but want to pass through? Has that been considered?
We haven't looked at temporary solutions just yet, Eleanor, simply because it would be a function of the solution, the permanent solution that we adopt. And so once we fully understand, we've tested the various options through the assessment factors and criteria that we're currently using, and tweaked it as well, to suit local conditions and so on and so forth. And once we've arrived at a solution, and considered the construction program, the constructability of it, the logistics, the disruption issues, and so on, we will have to look at temporary solutions as well, to minimize disruption, to minimize the cost as well. The economic viability of a particular option will also depend on what sort of temporary solution we adopt. So I couldn't give you an answer right now because we haven't looked at temporary solutions just yet.
Sure, but it is something that will be considered.
Absolutely.
To have something in place in the meantime.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. To minimize disruption, absolutely. Yes.
Super.
Brilliant. Any more questions? Looking at those who haven't raised any questions so far, in case that they want to share any thoughts.
Well, if I may just pop back just for a second, talking about the temporary crossing, of course, if you build the bridge offset like I keep suggesting, well, it's not my suggestion, I keep saying it, but it's not my suggestion. It's actually one that somebody else came up with back in 2014. But if you do that, you can leave the crossing open until you finish the bridge.
Yes.
So you don't need a temporary crossing. It's open all the time while you're building the bridge.
Correct. Yeah. And that's why I was trying to say, it's a function of the solution that we choose. Yes, I agree. And just on that, John, and while you're here, as I said, it is a solution that we're looking at. And on the face of it, when our engineers looked at it, Arab that is, when they looked at it, there were concerns about the gradient, whether it would be compliant with highway codes and so on. So that is something that I think we will need to consider very carefully. So certainly I would like to meet up with you offline, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, if you stand there and you can work out the distances, you can work out the angles. I must admit, though, something that should have happened years ago down London Road is that there should have been a 7.5 ton max weight limit down that road years ago. Never mind for this. It should. Why those 42 ton trucks go down there at the moment, I've no idea. That should have been banned years ago. So you should get onto OCC and get them to do that. I'm not quite sure about the double-decker buses, though, how they get over the bridge. That could be interesting. And certainly if you built a tunnel, imagine building a tunnel deep enough for a double-decker bus. I mean, you are talking about a long way for the ramps.
Yes. And that would cut off, the various estates and housing, and it would be extremely, in fact, it would cut off access to quite a few houses. Yeah, and it's, like I said, a very expensive option, very expensive.
Yeah, and as you say, the water table around here is about a foot down.
Yes.
So you dig a hole, it's going to fill up with water.
Yeah, and you need constant, submersible pumps and chambers and sumps, and which would need to work 24/7. Again, maintenance issue, cost, whole life costing issues come into play.
Just while nobody else is talking for a second, just coming before Les, when you were talking about freight, I'm surprised that Les didn't mention the freight on the army depot, because that's a rail freight interchange that's been there for 70 years. And if it comes into fruition, we could use that. It does line up with your railway already. It is used. I'll let Les carry on with that.
Yeah, no, it's right. I was actually going to come forward with that as well. But yeah, absolutely, it's ideal, because I think this is the opportunity now, which is to get the freight, onto trains and you know, and especially with the fact that we're centrally in a nice location where we can go north, south, east and west and service all of those, and looking at it from a military point of view, from the docks into the south to go up to the depots up into the north and to the south, to the west coast, I should say, and then to the east coast where a lot of our traffic for armed forces actually goes up Felixstowe and all around that way. I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity, and as John's already said, that was an original sort of freight depot there, right next. You know, it's just fantastic. But we haven't been using the internal network. And if you think of businesses, which one has been trying to trumpet for some time, but to use the Graven Hill east sites area with all those lovely buildings, you know, they're fantastic buildings, and yet we can't seem to get people to go in there. And then, of course, if we did, they'd be able to move, instead of using vehicles to transport the goods, they'd be able to use the fast and efficient service to all parts of the country, you know, by using that particular area. The one question I wanted just to say, tongue in cheek, really, was the fact that we have the engineering skills to be able to put a tunnel under the English Channel. I'm sure it's not too much of a problem to be able to negotiate. You know, perhaps a bit of water underneath the London Road level crossing. So if we can do it for the English Channel, I'm sure we can do it for the crossing as well. Thank you. You're not supposed to laugh, you know. It's supposed to be genuine. No,
I mean, I mean, absolutely. We can. I mean, we can find engineering.
Tongue in cheek.
I mean, engineering solutions. You know, I mean, we can find the latest and the best technology. We have the best technology. It's about whether it's you know, cost effective and economic for a scheme of this nature, of the scale and size of the problem we're dealing with. Right.
And Donna, you have a question?
Just talking about the cost there, do you have a budget? Do you have a set budget for the solution?
Not a specific budget for this, no.
Any kind of number roughly at all, or just nothing's been discussed as yet?
No, I mean, we've got historical numbers that have been that are floating around, and they've come out of you know, Network Rail reports and so on. But they're all numbers. We need to validate them. But we're looking at between, you know, the numbers that were in the previous reports were ranging from 70 to 100 million.
Okay, it was just because obviously if there is a budget, that does influence which of the proposals you can actually even look at in further detail.
Yeah, we don't have a budget. We don't have a budget.
I think, you know, the key test for government is always two things. One, affordability. So in the grand scheme of all the things it's investing in, you know, what is affordable, and linked to that, what money. So what are the costs and the benefits? So, you know, they tend not to go, you've got X as an amount of money. They tend to go, well, tell us what you think the options look like, and then we'll consider affordability and we'll consider value.
So whose budget is it coming from then, on that question? Who's ultimately going to pay the bill? Who's got to agree to it?
So ultimately, it comes from the Department for Transport's budget, which comes from the Treasury.
And there's a cost versus benefit report done for it, for the solution?
Yeah, so there'll be a business case for it, yeah.
Thank you.
And any more questions, Eleanor?
Hi, just to add to Donna there, so ultimately it would be the Department of Transport who would approve which method we go with for the solution?
Yeah, so we'll develop recommendations, but ultimately it will go to the department and the Treasury for decision.
Okay, and do you have like an ETA when you need to provide that list?
So what we're currently doing is, once we get to the other side of the consultation, we'll see the amount of consultation responses that we've got. That will in part determine the level of work that we need to do in terms of the number of options we're developing and those sorts of things. But I'd have thought within about the next 12 months, we'll be coming back out for the next round of consultation, by which point we should have narrowed down the options, as I say, to a preferred option, but explaining why that is our preference.
Oh, okay, and Lyndon, you mentioned that was the next set of consultations would be March to June next year. So roughly
yes, stat consultation. That's right.
Okay, super. Thanks.
Brilliant. Any questions from, I suppose, like those who haven't raised any so far? I think we still have time for like a couple more, and then we can go into next steps. Oh, Simon.
Yeah, just listening to a lot of what has been said. Presumably this project, have you got a timeline for it? I mean, we're talking about the consultation process, so whatever that looks like at the end of the day, and the proposition you put forward to Department of Transport and the Treasury, how long will that process take in terms of getting to a final decision? And then obviously there's the implementation. So what does it look like going forward from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think probably as we've sort of set out before, we're looking at in terms of when construction is likely to start, going through the approvals processes and the consenting process and all those sorts of things. You're probably looking at construction starting on these phases of East-West Rail sort of late 24, early 25. And that would be with a fair wind in terms of sort of making progress from here. And then depending on how long the construction and entry into service phases take as well, we're probably into the latter half of this decade and potentially early next. So it's that sort of shape.
Thank you.
Great. Les.
Yeah, just following on from the question from sort of Simon, will the project, if whatever the project is for the whole east to west, which I assume will go ahead at some point, and with the electrification as well, or some other method suitable, but we're talking about the time frame. Will work start on various sections? First of all, because if you start to do it from whenever, the first bit, say you started from Vista and you start working your way, that's going to be a considerable amount of time before the construction is actually completed. So I'm just wondering whether there's a situation where, they'll start on various areas, wherever they got approval and they can get on and construct. Is that what's going to happen, or are we going to do it in little steps, from Vista, working our way across, to Cambridgeshire?
Look, we want to get this done as quickly as we can. So where we can make progress, where we've got approvals or consents in place, then we would make progress, and we will. Even when we do the full construction, it's quite new. We haven't yet finalised our construction strategy, but it would be quite normal to have a number of different work fronts open at the same time as we sort of make progress through this to do this as quickly as possible. But one of the big things that kind of probably determines when most of your main construction work can start is the consenting process. And most of the consents for this railway, not all of them, but most of them, will be part of a development consent order. And as I say, we think it's likely to be sort of late 24, early 25 before that consent is in place. As soon as you've got that, you can then obviously begin to deliver it in the most efficient way you possibly can.
John.
Just a quick one. I noticed, I just want to thank you for building the bridge on the next level crossing up. That seems to be progressing quite well. And you've even put some track in, I noticed. Although it's quite difficult to look up and down the track when you go and negotiating that steep bend, but never mind. It's, but it looks like progressing well. But I noticed there's a planning application in for closing off the entrance to the allotments. And I'm just wondering, are those people going to be able to get to the allotments from some other direction? Do you know the allotments down near the roundabout?
I must say, John, unless Lyndon remembers this from his time working on configuration state 1, I'm not aware of the precise details on that planning application, but it is something that I'm sure Geordie can pick up with the team and come back to you on.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be covered. I noticed the other application is to do with getting into the tithe barn, but I know that that's being blanked off and you're putting a new road in a bit further back so that the people can get into the tithe barn. So that seems quite sensible. But I just wondered about the allotments because that seems to be, it's quite close to the bridge, so it's going to be a bit awkward.
I couldn't give you a useful answer, John, but I will take that away and get back to you and work with Jody on that.
Okay, just a detail really.
Brilliant. So I suppose we can do kind of like final questions, and if not, we can then jump on to next steps. Anyone for any more? No, then I suppose, Hannah, we could bring back the slides and we can wrap up.
Yep, just bring them up now.
So in terms of what comes next, you know, as I think we've said, there are, I think, 5 more online sort of Q&A live chat events over the balance of this week and next week before the consultation draws to a close on the 9th of June. We do see this though as, you know, whilst we have a period of non-statutory consultation, we do want to make sure that we have an ongoing dialogue with local communities, you know, even after consultation, and you know, because there are more questions coming as we've set out. So we do want to maintain a live dialogue with you, particularly in an area where, you know, there are a number of options that we need to work through, for example, at Vista. So do please encourage people to respond to the consultation. We do look forward to an ongoing discussion. And I say, I think we have had a little bit of sort of conversation about what the next steps look like in terms of progressing to statutory consultation next year and then through into the DCO process thereafter. You've got our email address there, you've got our phone number there. You know, please do stay in touch. And I think that probably wraps us up for today. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.